With this individual, we've got definitely a couple of risk factors highlighted in terms that they're coming up to peak height velocity, they're growing at a rapid speed. So this is someone we would certainly want to keep an eye on from an injury risk perspective. All youth sports are categorized according to age, under 14s, under 15s, under 16s. And yet growth and maturation is happening at a different rate in a lot of our individual athletes. And so measuring this growth and tracking maturation status is critical for anyone working with youth athletes. I want to thank Action Apps for sponsoring this video and giving me the opportunity to demonstrate their new maturation dashboards with you. But before I demonstrate those, it's critically important that we understand what we're calculating and why. So in this video, I'm going to be discussing biological age versus chronological age, why these difference matters, and how we can assess it with our athletes. Now, we often group growth and maturation in together, but let's define these two terms. Growth then relates to the physical increase in the body or particular body part, whereas maturation then is the progress towards a biologically mature state. And although we might think this just goes along with age, actually we now understand that it varies between individuals in both the timing, i.e. when maturation is occurring, as well as the tempo, so how quickly the maturation process takes. So we have our chronological age, that's the age based on our date of birth, but we also then have our biological age, which is based on our maturity status, so this biological process of maturation. And these two don't necessarily line up. So here we have an example of perhaps an under 12 girls soccer team. And actually, although they are all said to be under 12, we have massive variety in their maturation status. But we also shouldn't just presume it based on height alone. These girls, for instance, yes, they may be early developers in terms of their maturation, but they may also just be going on to be naturally tall girls and may even still be average or late developers in terms of their maturation. We can't just make this assumption based on either their chronological age or their height as we see it. We want to measure the rate of change in the height, and then this will allow us to plot a height velocity curve. It shows us how quickly someone is growing. Here we have then the textbook velocity curve for height, with the black line representing the height velocity in boys and the dotted line here representing height velocity in girls. We can see both the initiation of the growth spurt, which on average in girls is around 10 years and in boys is around 12 years old. Then we can also see their peak height velocity, so the phase within which there is the maximum magnitude in rate of growth. And you can see then on average in girls, it's around perhaps 11 to 12 years, with boys perhaps 13, 14 or 15 years old. But of course, there's massive individual variability in growth curves in reality. Growth spurts can vary from 5 centimeters to 12 centimeters a year. Age at peak height velocity ranges in girls from around 9 to 15 and in boys from 12 to 16. So at any one time, a single youth age group could have perhaps up to a 6-year difference in the biological age within the same chronological age group. Why does this matter then? I want to talk about 3 key areas in which this variation in maturation may be having an impact, and those are talent identification, athletic development, and injury risk. Because of how many of our youth sports are set up based around this chronological age, which doesn't account for the variety of biological age that we just described within the age group, there is then a tendency in scouting and talent identification to overestimate the potential of your early developers, those who are ahead in terms of their biological maturation, and underestimate the potential of your late developers. We've seen some large-scale research in recent times, particularly in football academies, that have highlighted this effect. We have this paper from Amanda Johnson in Science and Medicine in Football that highlights that athletes are being chosen in large by their maturation status. This is illustrated in this figure that shows the percentage of each cohort as per maturation status, so early, normal, or late developing, by age group bands. And this is in boys' academies. And we can see the increasing prevalence through these pubertal age groups of early maturing athletes as age increases. And that clearly is at the expense of both normal and then late maturing athletes. And these authors conclude that the current system of age banding in academies is detrimental to those later developers, and that actually academy selection processes are inadvertently disadvantaging their ability to produce the maximum number of adult athletes because of this preferential selection of players who are more skeletally mature early on in academy age groups. And it's these kinds of findings that have led to biobanding events where teams are grouped according to their maturation status and their biological age, as opposed to just the chronological age. If you're interested in that, then definitely take a look at the biobanding research, much of which has been led by Sean Cumming. Maturation status then also has an impact in terms of athletic development and performance over that time. We see, particularly during peak height velocity, that most intense period of growth, fluctuating levels of coordination, and that may limit individuals going through that phase in terms of their movement strategies and how coordinated they look on the field of play. Also has a massive impact in terms of physical performance. And this recent systematic review and meta-analysis from James Baker highlighted large differences in both sprinting and jumping performance between the least and the most mature male athletes, i.e. comparing those who are post-peak height velocity with those who are pre-peak height velocity. So it's really important then that we consider these differences in terms of both coordination and movement, and then also the physical capacities of strength, sprinting, jumping, and how that might impact performance in the sport itself. And crucially then, we just don't want to judge an individual based on some of their physical performance, which may just be an effect of their maturation status. That's a really important consideration, firstly, for the management of the athlete's day-to-day, but then certainly in terms of any selection decisions that are being made in academy football, for instance. Thirdly, then we have injury risk, because the rapid growth around peak height velocity has been associated with an increase in injury risk. Here we have a fantastic open access paper in biology of sport that took data from 20 consecutive seasons in an elite soccer academy, again, focused on boys, and we certainly need much more data to understand these effects in girls. And they explored the impact of growth and maturity status on injury risk throughout this data set. And we can see here those athletes around their peak height velocity, particularly those who were growing at the highest growth rates, were at a higher injury risk for various injuries, particularly the growth-related injury issues. This was also reflected in David Johnson's work, in particular this 2023 paper, which is open access, and it talked about these three key risk factors: maturation status, so around peak height velocity, which generally occurs at about 88 to 92% of predicted adult height, which I'll come back to shortly. That period of time is associated with an increased injury burden. Secondly, like I just mentioned in the previous paper, that growth tempo, those who are growing at the fastest rate, in particular those growing at a rate greater than 7.2 centimeters per year, were at greatest injury risk. And the third factor then is lower limb growth rate, although unsurprisingly, this has a strong association with the overall growth tempo in the individual. And some of David Johnson's work has shown that intervention strategies, such as modifying training loads or modifying strength or movement programs, may help mitigate injury during those times where individuals are at greatest risk. So when they're growing at their fastest in that peak height velocity period. Hopefully, then I have justified the importance of tracking this in your youth athlete. So let's move on to our assessment strategies. And nowadays, it's become very common and popular to have a number of non invasive somatic equations that estimate maturity based on anthropometry measures. Firstly, we have the maturity offset approach. This is a regression equation that estimates the age of an individual away from their peak height velocity age. So this is based on equation published by Merwald, although there have been a number of iterations published in the research since. But it's this equation that is based on chronological age, standing height, seated height, and body mass of the individual. Next up, then we have the Camis-Roach method, and this provides a percentage of a predicted adult height. So it's expressing the individual's height as a percentage of what it estimates their fully mature adult height to be. And this is based on chronological age, height, body mass, and parental height. And interestingly, these are often adjusted for self-reporting because there's such a consistent pattern of people overestimating their own height. So those are two popular methods. It's not an either or. They're generally used in conjunction with each other, as we will see momentarily in Action Apps' new dashboards. But of course, we do have to mention that all these methods have an element of error within them and, of course, limitations. So ideally, you're using them together, but also incorporating it alongside other objective measures, as well as your subjective observations and those of the coach and other staff members around every individual. So we have 3 key goals of maturation monitoring, all of which I think you'll see the Action Apps dashboard certainly deliver. And those goals are to recognize the disparity between biological age and chronological age in our athletes, to monitor their growth spurts and their growth velocity, specifically to understand objectively where they're at in relation to peak height velocity. And thirdly, then to use this information to help tailor our training and our injury risk mitigation strategies, as well as potentially this consideration of this for talent identification, athlete development, and particularly athlete selection conversations. So thanks again to Action Apps for allowing me to demonstrate these dashboards, share with you all what they've been working on. It's important to note then that this is made up data that they've included, obviously for both anonymized purposes, but then just for this kind of beta approach to building these dashboards. The Action Apps AMS applications and database is built on the Microsoft Cloud, and all the reports are pre-built and made available in Power BI. So if you have that skill set in Power BI, then you can go away and make this as bespoke as you want in your own setting. These dashboards then are available for all customers as of now. You just need to collect the relevant data with good data quality, and the reports will work for you. If you're not a client, but you're interested in knowing more about Action Apps and their Power AMS, then I'll put a link below to the website and certainly get in touch to have a conversation with them. For now, let's dive deeper into these dashboards. You can see we've got our squad here that we can select from. And with this individual, we've got that disparity displayed between chronological age and biological age. We're also looking at where they're at in terms of peak height velocity. So here they're entering that initial stage coming towards peak height velocity. And this individual is an earlier maturer. As I mentioned earlier, then peak height velocity is generally associated with this predicted adult height between 88 and 92%. So you can see that this individual, Liam, is just coming up to peak height velocity. We can also see the growth tempo, so the rate at which this individual is growing. And again, that is almost off the chart for him. So with this individual, we've got definitely a couple of risk factors highlighted in terms that they're coming up to peak height velocity, they're growing at a rapid speed. So this is someone we would certainly want to keep an eye on from both an injury risk perspective. We also might want to adapt their training load and potentially as well their physical development programs. And crucially, we don't want to be necessarily judging them and making decisions based on the physical performance and coordination that we're observing from them during this period, because they may be performing at a lower level as a result of this maturity phase. Let's contrast that with someone else then. So I'm going to select here Miles Freeman. We can see that he is at about 98% of his predicted adult height. He is post-pubertal, and although he was a late maturer, he's gone through that peak height velocity phase. We can see again this red axis here that he's gone past the peak height velocity stages. His growth tempo is relatively low as he's very much nearing his complete adult height and full adult maturation. Clearly then, it's really important to have these player profiles so we can go through one by one each of our athletes and see where they're at. But we do also ideally want this squad view where we can also see all of our athletes on a single page. So in the table here, then we have a lot of these markers that we talked about throughout this video. We've got their current height, but then also their height at which they'll be at peak height velocity and their predicted adult height. We have their age at peak height velocity, and from that, the maturity offset is this MO, and as well, the growth tempo that we talked about. And again, this is interactive dashboard, so I can sort these athletes based on the different measures. Perhaps I want to look at those who are got the lowest maturity offset, so those who are furthest away from their peak height velocity. Or perhaps I want to look at those that are currently having the quickest growth in stature, so their growth tempo here that we can highlight, and we know that that is one of the risk factors talked about in David Johnson's work and of course many of the other papers on this topic. This is also visualized down here then in this growth rate tempo chart where we have it color coded depending on that tempo, so the centimeters per year, to see who is growing at the fastest rate. And we've also got our whole squad visualized here then as that percentage of predicted adult height. So we could also have a look here, remembering that crucial band around 88 to 92%, that we think that is often when peak height velocity is occurring. So someone like James Ortiz here, someone we probably want to dive deeper into because of them being around that 90% of their predicted adult height. For all of these terms and abbreviations as well, usefully with this dashboard, Action Apps have provided this glossary so you can dive into the actual definitions of what they mean for all of those terminology. So to try and help the user identify some of those athletes based on the risk factors that we spoke about earlier, here they are highlighting the top 5 individual athletes. Here, those who are at an age that is closest to their peak height velocity age. We have those who are still growing, so those who are the lowest percentage of predicted adult height, as well as those individuals who have the highest growth rate. And of course, you would be looking for consistencies across these 3 buckets in the names, which we're actually seeing quite a lot of. For instance, Noah Thompson here is shown in all of them. Finally, then we have this visualization of maturity offset against growth tempo. Again, those are 2 of the most key risk factors for injury that was identified in the research. So we could use this snapshot to identify our athletes who are growing fastest, as well as those who are within the peak height velocity phase. As I mentioned, this is made up data, and of course it'd be really interesting to explore with your own data set and then potentially individualize it further based on the kinds of visualizations that you would think would be most beneficial for tracking maturity in your athletes. Hopefully that demonstration brings to life some of the research and the theory that I was talking about in the first half of this video in terms of the importance of tracking maturation in your athletes. But of course, it would be remiss of me not to mention that this is a very complicated area in which there has been a lot of research done. And I myself am not an expert on this topic. Here, I wanted to share a number of the people who are. So if you're interested in exploring this further, I definitely would encourage you to take a look at some of the work and research that's been done by these and many, many other individuals. So, of course, if you want to know more about Action Apps and either this specific feature or just in general about their services and the athlete data management solution they provide, then get in touch with the information below. Thanks again to them for sponsoring this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next Sports Science Insights video coming very soon.